Soul of the Earth. Chapter 2. Into Darkness. Civilization returned slowly. After the fall of Atlantis, the world entered a long silence. The survivors scattered across continents, carrying only fragments of memory, myths, symbols, rhythms that no longer connected to their source. But in time, those fragments began to cohere again. On the plains of what is now India and Central Asia, a new rise began. Not a single empire, but a loose lattice of city-states, warrior clans, and knowledge keepers. Their traditions would one day be recorded in epic poems, the Mahabharata, the Ramayana, but behind the stories lay echoes of something real. This was the Second Age, and it was not peaceful. At first, it followed the old balance. Sacred geometry returned in temple design. Resonant chambers were rebuilt, although their true purpose was already misunderstood. Symbols reappeared, spirals, solar wheels, star maps etched into stone. Some among the priest-scientists rediscovered the hidden harmonics embedded in language. They activated chants that could shift heart rhythms, calm the mind, and even influence the growth of plants. They believed they had found the divine. What they had found were the leftovers. Ancient lore systems had remained dormant for millennia, but subtle frequencies, linguistic triggers encoded in speech and ceremony, had begun to reactivate them. In scattered places across the land, caches of forgotten technology awoke. They found the skyboats first, circular or cigar-shaped vessels that responded to mental intention, not powered by combustion but by resonance. They floated when sung to properly, moved when harmonics were aligned. The knowledge came back in pieces, distorted by ritual, but still functional. The Vimana was no legend. They also found weapons, terrible ones, not swords or arrows, but devices that could disrupt magnetic alignment, disintegrate stone, or ignite matter at a distance. These were not built by the new civilizations. They were uncovered, dug from ancient vaults, misused, misinterpreted, and in time they were turned against one another. The Vedic Wars were not wars in the modern sense. They were skirmishes, amplified by godlike tools. Rival clans fought not just for land, but for control of sacred objects, power cores, harmonic arrays, the skyboats themselves. Great battles were fought in the air. Witnesses described glowing discs moving faster than any bird, pillars of fire descending from the heavens, and cities leveled without a single stone thrown. One epic tells of a single weapon that turned the day into night and caused unborn children to cry out in the womb. The rivers boiled, the forests turned to ash. Survivors described a wind that stripped flesh from bone. These were not metaphors. This was the misuse of our legacy, and it triggered something worse. The earth responded. Deep tremors awakened faults long dormant. The poles shifted, ice melted, ocean levels rose, not slowly, but in walls. A harmonic destabilization triggered by the misuse of ancient devices inverted planetary balance. What had once been snow became flood. Tectonic stresses released in a chain reaction. Storm systems spun out of season, out of reason. The oceans rose fast, faster than any culture could adapt. Lowland cities disappeared within days. Entire coastlines vanished. Valleys became seabeds, crops failed, mountain passes iced over. No region was spared. The deluge swept across Asia, Africa, and the Americas. Even highland settlements were battered by rains and atmospheric turbulence, unseen in the modern era. Millions died. Civilizations were not just lost, they were erased. The few survivors, huddled in scattered enclaves, clinging to memory now warped by trauma. They buried what they could. Some encoded their knowledge in oral traditions. Others scrawled desperate images on stone walls and cave ceilings. Myths of a great flood, of wrathful gods, of sky fire and watery punishment spread into every culture on earth. The Lord did not intervene. They had seen this pattern before. Gifts misused, memory corrupted. When stewardship gave way to domination, the protocol was clear: watch, but do not correct. By the end of the Vedic Wars and the global flood that followed, entire regions were uninhabitable. A few skyboats were hidden away in underground chambers. Most were destroyed either by accident or sabotage. The knowledge of how to use them vanished again, this time buried under generations of misinterpretation and guilt. The few survivors reacted in two ways. Some, like the early Brahmanical orders, buried the ancient stories in coded language, parables, and hymns only fully understood by initiates. Others created strict hierarchies to prevent access to power. Knowledge was compartmentalized, ritualized, stripped of its potential, and turned into obedience. The root language remained but was folded into Sanskrit, Pali, Avestan. Its harmonic core still shaped thought, but no longer unlocked machines. Balance was not restored. But war had passed. The flood became the line between myth and memory, and again, humanity forgot. From the ashes of forgotten wars, a new pattern emerged. Civilization did not restart in one place but in several, like scattered embers flaring back to life. In Mesopotamia, along the banks of the Tigris and Euphrates, city-states rose in tiers of mud brick and mathematics. In Egypt, stone moved like water, forming temples aligned to the stars. In the highlands of South America, terraces carved from mountains fed vast populations before writing even existed. Everywhere, something strange happened. Knowledge surged, not slowly, but in sudden bursts. Astronomy emerged seemingly overnight. Entire calendars appeared, tracking not just the sun and moon, but precession, solstices, and equinoxes. Giant megaliths were arranged with precision beyond what crude tools could explain. Civil engineering, irrigation, and metallurgy arose fully formed, as if remembered rather than invented. And above it all, kings began to claim the sky. They called themselves sons of gods, divine representatives, star-born rulers. They wore headdresses shaped like flames and wings. Their staffs mirrored the shape of ancient antennae. Their temples were not just places of worship. They were signal structures, built in the same proportions as ancient harmonic arrays once used to channel Earth's residents. They were not gods, but they had found the echoes. A few among them had recovered fragments, artifacts from a world before the flood. The survivors of Atlantis and the Second Age had passed down what little they retained: fragments of star maps, mnemonic chants embedded with geometric codes, and diagrams misunderstood as holy symbols. The rulers used these to legitimize their power, but they did not understand them. In Sumer, inscriptions told of beings who descended from the sky to gift law and agriculture, the Anunnaki. In Egypt, the first pharaohs were said to be demigods, whose ancestors had come from the stars. In the Andean highlands, Viracocha walked out of Lake Titicaca and taught the people to build with stone. The stories differ, but the pattern is the same. Ancient knowledge rebranded as divine right. The alien systems remained dormant. The lore had withdrawn fully into sleep. Their deep ocean stations still functioned, but only at a background level, maintaining balance, not shaping destiny. Their presence was no longer sensed, no longer remembered, only mimicked. In the absence of true contact, human elites began to pretend. They copied the old symbols, carving them into stone and gold. They built ziggurats, pyramids, and stepped platforms that echoed Atlantean towers. Some even recreated the resonance chambers, but without the frequencies. The sounds no longer worked. The machines no longer responded. Yet the illusion of power remained. The masses believed their rulers were divine, and the rulers began to believe it too. But without understanding, their works became hollow. Sacred geometry turned into decorative motifs. Astronomical alignments became ritual timings. The language that once shaped cognition was ritualized into incantation. And the last vestiges of the alien gifts, the skyboats, the energy harmonics, the deep archives, were buried under generations of misinterpretation. Humanity had not fallen back into darkness, but it had turned inward. The sky, once filled with signals, went quiet. No more frequencies were triggered, no more chambers awoke. The machines watched but made no move. The watchers had become myths, and the myths had become power. Time did not heal the wound, it covered it. After the flood, after the sky fire and the fall of the Second Age, humanity began to stitch together a new story, threaded from fragments of memory, half-truths, and survival instincts. The ancient world was not preserved, it was transformed. Technologies became rituals, science became taboo. What had once been understood was now feared, and the names of the old tools were replaced by the names of gods. This was not the end of civilization, but the end of clarity. The great forgetting had begun. It was not orchestrated by any one power. It happened organically, over generations. Survivors passed down stories they no longer understood. Grandparents spoke of flying discs and speaking stones, but their grandchildren remembered only fire in the sky and water that devoured the world. What the cataclysm had not destroyed, time and trauma erased. Not everything was lost. Humans still made fire, still forged tools, still used the wheel. The fundamentals endured. But the higher knowledge, the resonant sciences, the harmonic geometries, the energy alignments, these were buried, not because they were false, but because they had become dangerous. And so, a new world was born. Civilizations began to rise again, not as a return to what had been, but as reinvention. In the land between the rivers, in fertile Mesopotamia, cities like Eridu and Uruk grew from clay and canal. The people there tracked the stars and mapped the heavens, building ziggurats that pointed skyward in stacked tiers. They carved tablets that spoke of beings from the sky, Anunnaki, emissaries of law and learning. These were not fictions, they were memories. But those memories had already begun to blur. In the east, the Indus Valley flourished. Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa were cities of great planning and mystery. Their streets followed grids, their buildings had baths and drains. They used standardized weights, yet no royal tombs, no clear signs of conquest. Their script remains undeciphered, as if written in a code that has long since slipped from human minds. Across the Mediterranean and beyond, scattered societies rose, each carrying pieces of a forgotten whole. In Egypt, the earliest dynasties inherited stonework and star-length monuments older than their own culture. Their priests spoke of Zep-Tepi, the first time, when gods ruled on earth and great knowledge flowed like the Nile. But no one remembered what Zep-Tepi truly was. The scholars of the Second Age, the linguists, astronomers, and harmonic engineers, had long since passed. A few tried to preserve their knowledge, some encoded principles into sacred geometry, others buried their works beneath mountains or behind myth. But most of it was simply lost. The root language endured, woven into the cadence of Sanskrit, Akkadian, and Proto-Numerian. Its underlying structure still shaped human thought, helping minds build logic, metaphor, comparison. But the keys were gone. The tones and harmonics that once activated ancient systems were no longer taught. The language of resonance was now the language of ritual. And the earth, once so carefully tuned, fell silent again. The alien stations remained hidden. Beneath the ocean, the lower constructs drifted through cycles of passive observation. Their lunar counterparts maintained orbit, scanning the Earth with dormant systems, waiting for the frequencies that would indicate awakening. But those signals never came. Humanity was too far removed. The Watchers did not sleep, but they did not act. They were not gods. They were not saviors. They would not restart the experiment again. They waited for resonance, for signs of coherence, memory, balance. Until then, they remained embedded within the deep infrastructure of the earth, present but forgotten. And so the third age of civilization advanced, not guided by ancient legacy, but by necessity. Humans grew crops, built temples, and charted the stars. They recorded laws, raised kings, and fought wars. They believed themselves to be at the dawn of everything, but they were walking on the buried bones of something older, greater, and nearly lost. Across the earth, faint clues remained. Massive stone blocks positioned with impossible precision, structures aligned to solstices and lunar standstills, myths of a golden age, of beings who taught language and law, of floods sent to punish pride. Every culture carried some version of it, but the deeper message, the reason behind the fall, was gone. Only the fear remained, and in that silence power grew. Priests became the gatekeepers of stories they could no longer decode. Rulers claimed divine ancestry based on symbols they did not understand. Temples were built not to harmonize with the earth, but to extract authority from heaven. It was not a dark age, but it was dim. The world moved forward in pieces. The lure waited, not for prayers or for discovery, for resonance, for the signal that would say, memory has returned. But not everyone forgot. As empires rose and fell, as kings carved their names into stone and priests rewrote the heavens, a quieter story was passed down, one not shouted in temples or etched into public records. It moved in shadows, in whispers, in coded texts tucked between legends. A hidden lineage endured. They were not a single bloodline or secret order. They were scattered across time and culture, linked not by ancestry, but by recognition. Each one, in their own way, saw that something in the official story did not add up. That civilization had not risen in a straight line, but had been reset. That knowledge had been buried, not lost. Some were scholars, others mystics. A few were simply curious minds who noticed patterns in the chaos, similarities between star maps drawn on opposite sides of the world, or the recurrence of spiral glyphs in unrelated languages. Most of them worked alone, some were silenced, a few became legends themselves. They were the first stewards. In Sumer, a priest who learned to read the stars beyond their seasonal meaning discovered ratios embedded in temple layouts that matched those found in pre-flood ruins. He left his findings encoded in a numeric system misunderstood for centuries. In Egypt, an architect inserted fractional deviations into pyramid angles, preserving harmonics that resonated with buried chambers beneath the sands. In Mesoamerica, a calendar maker folded lunar alignments into a glyph system that wouldn't be understood until thousands of years later. None of them knew the whole truth, but they each protected a piece. By the first millennium BCE, these fragments had become strands in a vast, invisible web, disconnected across continents, but aligned in intent. Vaults were built beneath libraries, scrolls copied by hand, generation after generation. Some encoded the old myths not as stories, but as puzzles. Maps disguised as metaphors, clues hidden in the structure of poetry and prayer. In the Himalayan foothills, a small school of monks preserved chants not heard anywhere else, tones that could still activate minor resonance in the local stone. In the Andes, a series of stepped wells were arranged to match the stars of a long-lost constellation no longer visible in the modern night sky. In West Africa, griots carried a story of a sky-born city that fell when it tried to rival the moon. Each of these clues would later be dismissed by academics as coincidence, but they were not coincidences, they were breadcrumbs. The root language never vanished. It lay dormant, hidden in lullabies and ritual phrasing, in the cadence of ancient law and the structure of certain prayers. Occasionally a thinker would catch a glimpse, realize that the earliest languages all shared something invisible, something unspoken. These thinkers were often ignored, sometimes celebrated, and occasionally hunted. The world had moved on. Science was born again, but divided from spirit. Philosophy flourished, but disconnected from memory. Religion held fragments of truth but caged them in dogma. The stewards worked between these boundaries, never able to speak openly, always careful, for if the truth came too soon, it could trigger the same collapse that had drowned Atlantis and shattered the sky in the Vedic Wars. So they waited. Encoded manuscripts were passed hand to hand through the Library of Alexandria, through hidden chambers beneath desert monasteries, through forbidden scrolls preserved in cold mountain caves. Whenever empire or church threatened to burn them, someone always managed to save at least a copy. They called themselves different names: the Watchers, the Guardians, the Flame Bearers, the Archivists. The names changed with time and region, but the function remained to keep the signal alive. That signal, what the lore would call resonance, was not just stored in books. It lived in people, in minds that could still, even faintly, hear the song of balance, feel the pattern beneath chaos, detect the old pulse of the moon and the deep ocean breath of the alien machines. Most never knew they were part of something greater. A few did. By the dawn of the modern age, this hidden lineage had dwindled but not disappeared. It remained like an underground current, waiting for convergence, waiting for technology to catch up to intuition, waiting for language to loop back toward its source, waiting for the right moment, the right mind, the right voice to speak the forgotten word.